That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The desert wind cut through the thin fabric of Jack Harlan's jacket as he pulled his old Harley into the gravel lot of the Last Chance Diner just off Route 66. It was the kind of wind that carried the faint scent of sagebrush and diesel, whispering promises of colder nights ahead. Jack killed the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in, broken only by the distant hum of semis barreling toward the horizon. His hands, calloused from years of wrenching on bikes and gripping handlebars through storms, lingered on the grips a moment longer than necessary. He glanced back at the sidecar, where his daughter Lily slept bundled in a wool blanket, her small chest rising and falling in the pale dawn light. Lily was 7, with hair the color of sun-bleached sand and eyes that held too much quiet for a child her age. Jack had been raising her alone since her mother walked out 3 years back, leaving nothing but a note and a stack of unpaid bills. The Ironhawks, his riding crew, had become their makeshift family, rough-edged men who patched up engines and scraped together cash for gas money, never asking for more than a nod of thanks. But holidays were the hardest. Christmas loomed like a shadow on the empty road, and Jack's wallet was as flat as the Nevada flats stretching out behind them. He swung his leg over the bike, boots crunching on frost-kissed pebbles, and gently shook Lily's shoulder. "Hey, kiddo, time to stretch those legs." Her eyes fluttered open, bleary and trusting, and she rubbed them with tiny fists. No complaints, just a small smile that twisted something deep in Jack's chest. He lifted her out, her weight light as a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The diner's neon sign flickered above the door. "Open 24/7" in faded red cursive, casting a bloody glow on the cracked asphalt. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and sizzling bacon, the jukebox murmuring an old Johnny Cash tune about walking the line. Jack settled Lily into a booth by the window, her sneakers dangling above the vinyl floor. The waitress, a woman named Rosa with lines etched around her eyes from too many double shifts, slid over with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, steam curling like ghosts. "On the house," she said softly, her gaze lingering on Lily's drawn face. Rosa knew the type, riders passing through, carrying burdens heavier than their saddlebags. Jack nodded his thanks, the gesture tight, and pulled a crumpled 5 from his pocket for the tip. It was all he could spare. As Lily sipped her drink, fingers wrapped around the mug for warmth, Jack's mind wandered to the calendar tacked behind the counter. December 23rd. 2 days until Christmas, and he hadn't even scraped together enough for a proper gift. The Hawks had a tradition, pooling what little they had for the kids in the crew, but this year, with the garage back in Reno shut down by some zoning beef, times were leaner than ever. Jack stared out at the road, where the first rays of sun glinted off a distant billboard advertising a holiday festival in the next town over. Santa Claus appearances, toy drives, lights strung like stars, things for families with roots, not wanderers like them. Lily's voice pulled him back, small but steady. "Daddy, can we see Santa this year, like in the stories?" Her eyes, wide and hopeful, searched his face. Jack's throat tightened. He forced a half smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see, sweetheart. Road's calling. But maybe." Lies came easier on mornings like this, when the weight of single parenthood pressed like an unyielding throttle. The bell above the door jingled, and a convoy of polished SUVs rolled into the lot, engines purring with the arrogance of money. Out stepped a man in a tailored overcoat, Elias Grant, the billionaire developer who'd been buying up land along the route, turning dusty motels into luxury stops for the wealthy. Jack knew the name from whispers in biker bars. Grant was the kind who saw roads like this as obstacles to pave over. His entourage fanned out, barking orders into phones, while Grant himself paused at the diner's window, glancing inside with the detached curiosity of a king surveying peasants. Rosa hurried over to their table, notepad in hand, but Grant waved her off, settling into a corner booth with his assistant. The air shifted subtly, the scent of expensive cologne cutting through the grease, voices low and clipped about deals and deadlines. Lily watched them, her spoon stirring circles in her mug, until Grant's gaze flicked her way. For a split second, something crossed his face. Annoyance? Pity. It vanished as quickly as it came. Jack felt the old tension coil in his shoulders, the kind that came from years on the margins, where men like Grant viewed riders like him as relics to be swept aside. But he kept his peace, focusing on Lily's chatter about school plays she'd missed on the road. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and a faint rain began to speckle the glass. The Hawk's code echoed in his mind, protect your own, no questions asked. Yet as the morning wore on, Jack couldn't shake the gnawing ache of what he couldn't provide. Not just toys, but stability, the kind of Christmas that didn't end with engine hum drowning out tears. By the time they hit the road again, the sun hung low, painting the desert in bruised purples. Lily dozed in the sidecar. Clutching a diner napkin, she'd drawn a lopsided Santa on. Jack gunned the throttle, the vibration rumbling through his bones, but his thoughts lingered on the festival lights in the distance. One stop, he told himself, for her. Little did he know, that choice would unravel threads connecting pasts he thought buried, drawing in a man like Grant and a question from a man in red that would freeze the world still. The rain thickened as they approached the town limits, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Neon signs blurred into halos. Welcome to Dustville, home of the annual lights parade. Jack pulled into a side street near the community center, where families milled under strung bulbs. Laughter muffled by the downpour. He parked under a sagging awning, wrapping Lily in his jacket before they stepped out. The air smelled of pine and hot cider, a stark contrast to the leather and oil of their world. Inside the hall, the chaos of the holiday fair enveloped them. Booths with handmade ornaments, carolers in wool scarves, and at the far end, a throne of velvet where Santa held court. Lily's hand tightened in Jack's, her excitement a fragile spark. They joined the line, the weight stretching as children ahead bounced with anticipation. Jack's pockets felt heavier with emptiness. He'd have to improvise, maybe trade a Hawk's patch for a candy cane. When their turn came, Lily climbed onto Santa's lap, her voice a whisper about a doll she'd seen in a catalogue months ago. Santa, an older man with a real beard and eyes kindled by genuine warmth, listened, nodding. Then he looked up at Jack, standing awkwardly to the side, and asked, "And what about you, son? What's the one gift you'd give anything for this Christmas?" The question hung in the air, simple yet piercing. Jack's breath caught, hands trembling at his sides. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck, tangled in unspoken guilt and the fierce loyalty that bound him to his daughter, to the road, to the brothers who'd never let him fall. In that moment, across the crowded room, Elias Grant paused mid-conversation, his gaze locking on the scene. Something in the billionaire's face shifted, a freeze like ice cracking under pressure, as if the question echoed back to him, unbidden and unavoidable. Jack stood there, the community hall's fluorescent lights humming overhead like a swarm of distant bees, casting long shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. The question from Santa lingered in the air, heavy as the damp wool of his jacket still clinging to his shoulders from the rain outside. Lily shifted on the man's lap, her small fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, eyes darting between her father and this bearded stranger who seemed to see more than most. The line of children behind them shuffled impatiently, their parents murmuring encouragements. But in that booth, time stretched thin, pulled taut by the weight of what Jack couldn't voice. He swallowed, the taste of diner coffee bitter on his tongue, and met Santa's gaze. Those eyes, crinkled at the corners, holding a quiet knowing that pierced without judgment. Jack started, his voice rough, gravelly from the road's endless dry. His hands clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening against the calluses, the faint tremor betraying the storm inside. What could he say? That the one gift he'd trade, his leathers, his bike, even the brotherhood that kept him upright, was a life where Lily didn't wake to the rumble of departure, where Christmas wasn't measured in scraped-together dollars, but in mornings without goodbyes. The words choked him, unspoken guilt rising like exhaust in the cold. Santa nodded slowly. No pressure in the gesture, just a patient tilt of his head that spoke of roads traveled and burdens carried. Take your time, son. Sometimes the hardest asks are the ones we carry alone. Lily reached out a hand toward Jack, her touch light on his arm, grounding him. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own fractures. The way he'd shielded her from the nights he'd lain awake in motel rooms, staring at water-stained ceilings, wondering if the Hawk's code of loyalty extended far enough to mend a father's failures. Across the room, Elias Grant remained frozen, his polished shoe half lifted from the floor as if the question had snagged him mid-stride. His assistant, a wiry man in a crisp suit, paused in his dictation, glancing up with a furrowed brow. Grant's face, usually a mask of calculated indifference, cracked subtly, a flicker in his jaw, a tightening around the eyes that no one else seemed to notice amid the holiday bustle. He lowered his phone, the screen's glow dying in his palm, and stared at the Santa throne as if it were a mirror reflecting something long buried. The billionaire who commanded boardrooms and reshaped skylines felt the pull of that simple inquiry like a chain around his neck, yanking him back to memories he'd paved over with deals and distance. The hall buzzed with life around them. A mechanic from the local garage, broad-shouldered and grease-stained, hoisted his toddler onto his hip while chatting with a waitress from the edge of town, maybe Rosa's cousin, with the same weary smile. They were the backbone here, folks piecing together shifts at the auto shop and the feed store, their lives orbiting the same empty stretches of highway Jack knew too well. A single mother nearby adjusted her son's too big scarf, her breath visible in the chill, seeping through the thin walls, and Jack caught the way her eyes softened when she looked at the toy raffle table, calculating odds she couldn't afford to lose. Lily slid down from Santa's lap, clutching a candy cane he'd pressed into her hand, the red and white stripes blurring slightly in the steam from a nearby hot cocoa station. "Your turn, Daddy," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Jack forced a nod, stepping forward as the line inched along. He perched awkwardly on the edge of the throne, the velvet creaking under his weight, feeling out of place amid the tinsel and laughter, like a shadow in a spotlight. Santa leaned in, voice low. "That question's for more than the season, isn't it? What's weighing on you out there on the blacktop?" Jack's gaze drifted to the rain-streaked windows, where his Harley sat sentinel under the awning, rain pattering on the tank like impatient fingers. The Ironhawks weren't just a club. They were his anchor, brothers like Tommy Red, the old vet with shrapnel scars hidden under ink, who'd once ridden through a blizzard to bring diapers when Lily was teething. Or Lena, the only woman in the crew, a tattoo artist with hands steady enough to mend a torn jacket or a broken spirit, who'd slipped Jack extra cash from her tips last month without a word. They lived by silent justice, no badges, just the code. You protect the vulnerable, you stand for the outcasts because the world sure as hell wouldn't. But even they couldn't fill the hollow of what Christmas demanded. Jack thought of the doll Lily wanted, its price tag a mocking $5 more than his last paycheck after gas and oil. "Just time," he finally murmured, the admission slipping out like a sigh. Time to give her something real, not promises. Santa's hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a warmth that seeped through the leather, compassionate without pity. Kindness finds a way, even on empty roads. Hold to that. As Jack rose, Lily beaming up at him with her prize, he caught Grant's eye across the hall. The billionaire had moved to a folding chair, staring at a program in his lap, but his posture was rigid, the frieze lingering in the set of his shoulders. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared recognition of margins, though worlds apart. Grant's life was one of excess, yet here, in this draughty hall, the question had stripped him bare, echoing his own unspoken lacks. A family fractured by ambition, a son lost to the grind years ago, whispers Jack would only learn later. The rain eased outside, turning to a fine mist that haloed the string lights along Main Street. Jack guided Lily toward the exit, her hand small in his, the candy cane crunching softly as she nibbled. They passed a group of locals huddled by the door, riders from a rival crew, not hawks, but nodding in quiet respect, their leathers scarred from the same unforgiving miles. One, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard, pressed a warm apple into Lily's palm. "For the road, kid," he grunted, no more words needed. Acts like that, small and unasked, wove the fabric of their world. Jack paused at the threshold, the desert air rushing in cool and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine. The weight of the morning settled deeper, moral suspense coiling like a spring. Should he push on, chase the next job, or linger here, where kindness flickered like neon in the dark? Lily looked up, her face alight. "That was magic, Daddy." He squeezed her hand, the tremor in his own fading just a touch. Little did he know, the threads were already pulling tighter, drawing Grant into their orbit, a collision of worlds where one question would demand a choice none could ignore. The mist clung to Jack's leathers like a second skin as he and Lily stepped out into the cooling evening, the community hall's warmth fading behind them. The streetlights of Dustville hummed to life one by one, their sodium glow pooling on the slick asphalt, turning the world into a watercolor of greys and yellows. Lily skipped a few steps ahead, her sneakers splashing in shallow puddles, the candy cane, now a sticky stub, clutched in her fist. Jack followed at a measured pace, his boots heavy on the uneven sidewalk, the question from Santa still echoing in his ears like the low rumble of a distant engine. Time. It was the one thing the road stole in generous measures, leaving him with fragments, stolen mornings in greasy garages, nights under flickering motel signs where he'd read Lily bedtime stories from faded paperbacks. They made their way to the edge of town, where the fairgrounds spilled into a makeshift parking area, lined with food trucks and vendor stalls. The air carried the mingled scents of caramel corn and engine oil, a reminder that even in holiday finery, this was still a place built on hard labor and harder choices. Jack spotted the Iron Hawk's rigs clustered near a chain-link fence. 3 Harleys, weathered and true, their chrome dulled by the road's relentless grind. Tommy Red leaned against his, a cigarette dangling from his lips, the ember glowing like a tiny accusation in the twilight. At 62, Tommy was the elder of the crew, his face a map of wrinkles carved by desert suns and the shrapnel from a forgotten war. He'd lost a leg below the knee in Nam, but rode with a prosthetic that clicked faintly when he shifted weight, a sound Jack had come to associate with quiet wisdom. "Jack!" Tommy called, his voice gravel over silk, exhaling smoke that curled toward the overcast sky. He nodded at Lily, who beamed and ran to hug his denim-clad leg. "Brought the princess to the lights, eh? Rosa called ahead, said you two hit the diner early." Tommy's eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, flicked to Jack's face, reading the tension there without a word. The Hawks didn't pry. They observed, pieced together silences like busted carburetors. "Yeah, needed a break from the throttle," Jack replied, ruffling Lily's hair as she pulled away to inspect Tommy's saddlebags. always curious about the hidden compartments where he stashed spare parts, or the occasional wildflower pressed between pages of an old road atlas. He glanced back toward the hall, where shadows moved behind the fogged windows. Families dispersing, the single mother from earlier bundling her son into a battered pickup, her shoulders slumped under the weight of another long shift waiting at dawn. Jack knew that posture. It was the bend of someone calculating rent against ramen, gifts against gas. Tommy stubbed out his cigarette on the sole of his boot, the spark dying with a hiss. Heard about the suits rolling in. That developer type, Grant, buying up the old mill site. Folks round here are whispering he'll turn the whole stretch into some resort trap, push out the garages, the diners. His tone carried no heat, just the measured judgment of a man who'd seen towns wither under Progress's boot. The Hawks had pulled into Dustville on a tip from Lena, their tattoo artist back in Reno, about a short-term gig fixing rigs for the local hauliers. But whispers of eviction notices had already started, the kind that came on crisp letterhead, ignoring the sweat equity folks like the mechanics at Al's Auto poured into keeping the roads alive. Jack's jaw tightened. The moral pull familiar, stay and fight the tide, or ride on before the flood hit. Not our fight, Tom, we're just passing. But the words felt hollow, especially with Lily humming a carol she'd picked up from the hall, her voice threading through the evening chill like a fragile lifeline. The Brotherhood's code hummed beneath it all, loyalty over law, protection for the vulnerable. They'd once ridden 100 miles to stand with a waitress in a podunk town, her ex showing up with threats after a bad split. No fists thrown, just presence. Engines idling like thunder, enough to send the man slinking away. Silent justice, the kind society dismissed as menace. A group of locals passed by the fence, their steps slowing as they eyed the bikes. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, improbably a feed store clerk, muttered to his wife. Bikers, hope they don't stir trouble with the parade tomorrow. She nodded, pulling their teenage daughter closer, the girl's gaze lingering on Lily, with a mix of curiosity and caution. Jack caught the words, the familiar sting of misjudgment settling like dust on his tongue. To them, the Hawks were shadows, leather and noise, hearts hidden under vests patched with faded eagles. They didn't see Tommy slipping a 10-spot to the single mother earlier, or Lena sketching free tattoos for kids scarred by life's rough edges. Outcasts judging outcasts, the irony bitter as black coffee. Lily tugged at Jack's hand, pointing to a stall where an older woman sold knitted scarves under a canvas canopy. The wool dyed in desert hues of rust and sage. "Daddy, can we look? For Tommy?" Her eyes pleaded, innocent of the world's divides. Jack hesitated, his pocket lighter than his conscience, but nodded. They approached, the woman's face lighting with a smile that crinkled her skin like well-worn leather. "Made these myself," she said, holding up a scarf the color of twilight. "For folks who chase the wind." No haggling, just a quiet exchange. Jack's last $2 for the knit, Tommy's eyes softening when Lily draped it around his neck, the wool warm against the cooling air. As dusk deepened, the first floats of the parade rumbled into view down the main drag, tractors draped in lights, children waving from hay bales. The Hawks watched from the sidelines, engines silent but vigilant. Elias Grant's SUV idled at the curb a block away, his silhouette visible through tinted glass, still as stone. Jack wondered what froze a man like that, what question from a stranger in red could pierce the armor of billions. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet pine and possibility. But the tension coiled tighter, a moral suspense building like thunder on the horizon. Tommy clapped Jack on the shoulder, his grip steady. "Road's got a way of sorting debts. Stick around for the parade, yeah? Lily deserves the lights." Jack met his gaze. The Brotherhood's compassion a quiet anchor amid the judgments. For her, he'd linger, one more night, one more choice teetering on the edge of what he could afford. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The parade lights strung along Dustville's main street flickered to life as the evening deepened, casting erratic shadows that danced across the faces of the gathered crowd. Jack stood with Lily perched on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair like reins, her laughter a rare, bright note amid the low murmur of engines and voices. The air hung heavy, with the scent of mulled wine from a nearby vendor and the faint, acrid tang of exhaust from the idling floats, old pickups transformed with plywood sleighs and twinkling LEDs. Tommy flanked them, the new scarf Lily had gifted him draped loosely around his neck, its wool absorbing the chill that seeped from the ground. The iron hawks had spread out along the curb, a loose phalanx of leathers and quiet vigilance, their presence drawing sidelong glances from the locals, but no outright challenge. Lily pointed excitedly as the first float rumbled past. A flatbed truck hauling a mechanical reindeer that jerked to life with a groan, its antlers aglow in red and green. "Look, Daddy, it's like the stories come real." Jack tilted his head back to catch her eye, forcing a smile that masked the ache in his neck from the day's miles. Her weight was a comfort and a reminder, pressing him to the earth when the road tempted escape. But beneath it, the question from Santa gnawed, a splinter under his skin. Time, he'd said, yet even now, with the parade's rhythm pulling them into the moment, he felt the pull of tomorrow's horizon, jobs waiting in the next dusty town. Across the street, Elias Grant's SUV remained parked, its engine a soft purr that cut through the festivities like a discordant note. Grant had stepped out at some point, his overcoat unbuttoned against the mild night, hands thrust into pockets as he watched the procession with the detachment of a man, observing from a penthouse window. His assistant hovered nearby, tablet in hand, but Grant waved him off, his gaze drifting back to Jack and Lily more than once. The freeze from earlier hadn't thawed. If anything, it had settled deeper, etching lines around his mouth that spoke of internal reckonings Jack could only guess at. Whispers from the crowd identified him, the developer whose name was synonymous with change, the man turning forgotten roots into gated enclaves, displacing the very souls who kept the asphalt alive. As the parade progressed, a second float approached, a hay wagon piled with donated toys, pulled by a team of locals in elf costumes, their faces flushed from the cold. Children surged forward at the edges of the barriers, hands outstretched, while parents held them back with murmured warnings. Lily wriggled, wanting down, and Jack set her gently on the ground, her boots splashing in a lingering puddle. She joined the press, eyes wide on the glittering boxes wrapped in newsprint and ribbon, the kind of makeshift magic that hid the poverty beneath. Jack knelt beside her, one arm loose around her waist, ready to lift if the crowd thickened. That's when it happened. A small ripple in the throng, a boy no older than Lily stumbling forward too eagerly, his hand brushing a low-hanging box on the float. It teetered, then tumbled, scattering a handful of toys into the mud at the curb. The elf driving the wagon braked sharply, the wagon lurching to a halt, and a sharp voice cut through the cheers. "Hey, kid, watch it. You break it. You bought it." The man, burly with a beard trimmed for the role, leaned out, his tone laced with irritation, born of a long shift and shorter patience. The boy froze, face paling under the lights, his single mother, the same one Jack had noticed earlier, pushing through to grab his arm, apologies tumbling from her lips in a rush. "I'm sorry. He didn't mean 'em. We'll pay. Just give us a minute." The crowd hushed slightly, an awkward pause hanging as eyes turned. Jack felt the shift, the moral tension coiling like a chain tightening around his chest. The hawks stirred subtly, Tommy's prosthetic clicking as he straightened, another brother, a wiry kid named Jax with fresh ink on his knuckles, edging closer without a word. It was the code activating, unbidden. No one hurts those we protect, especially not the small ones caught in the crossfire of a bad day. Jack's hand tightened on Lily's shoulder, shielding her view, but she watched wide-eyed, sensing the undercurrent. Grant, from his vantage, saw it too. He took a step forward, then stopped, his breath visible in the cooling air, the freeze returning, as if the scene mirrored some fracture in his own past. A child reaching for something just out of grasp, a mother's desperate scramble. His jaw worked silently, the billionaire's world of calculated risks colliding with this raw, unscripted vulnerability. He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering, but didn't dial. Instead, he watched, the internal conflict etching deeper. The elf grumbled something under his breath, reaching down to salvage the muddied toys. But the mother knelt, wiping her son's face with a trembling hand, her voice cracking as she fished crumpled bills from her pocket, ones that looked like they'd been smoothed from washers. "Please, it's all we have tonight." Lily tugged at Jack's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, help them, like Santa said about kindness." Her words hit like a soft punch, stirring the compassion he'd buried under layers of survival. Jack rose slowly, his boots scraping the gravel, and stepped forward. No grand gesture, just presence, his shadow falling over the scattered toys as he crouched, picking up a plush bear caked in dirt, brushing it clean with deliberate care. "Here," he said quietly to the boy, voice steady as an idling engine. "Looks like he just needs a wash. No harm done." The elf paused, meeting Jack's gaze. Leather vest, road-worn eyes, and something shifted. The irritation deflating into a nod. Tommy was there now, slipping a 20 from his wallet into the mother's hand under the guise of steadying her elbow, his touch light, unspoken. The moment passed like mist burning off at dawn, the float rumbling onward, the crowd resuming its cheer, but the air felt charged, the small act rippling outward. The mother mouthed a thank you, tears unshed in her eyes, and pulled her son close, the boy's shoulders relaxing for the first time. Lily beamed up at Jack, her hand finding his again, the warmth of it cutting through the chill. Grant observed it all, unmoving, the question from Santa echoing in his stillness. What would he give anything for? The parade lights reflected in his eyes, fractured and searching, as the moral suspense built, drawing their worlds closer, one quiet choice at a time. Jax clapped Jack on the back as they retreated to the curb, his grin subdued. Hawk's way, no fanfare. But Jack felt the weight of it, the internal tug between riding free and anchoring here, where loyalty demanded more than miles. The night air thickened, with the scent of rain renewed, distant thunder rumbling like an approaching storm, and across the way, Grant turned away finally, but not before Jack caught the subtle nod, a bridge forming in the silence between outcasts of fortune and road. The thunder that had grumbled on the horizon finally broke as the parade wound to its close, fat raindrops splattering the parade route like scattered applause. Jack scooped Lily up, her legs wrapping around his waist, her cheek pressing against his collarbone as the crowd began to disperse under a forest of umbrellas blooming like dark mushrooms. The air thickened with the petrichor of wet earth and cooling metal, the string lights along the street blurring into hazy orbs that reflected in the widening puddles. Tommy walked beside them, his limp more pronounced on the slick ground, the prosthetic clicking faintly against the uneven curb. "Storm's got teeth tonight," he muttered, pulling the scarf tighter. But there was no complaint in it, just the steady acceptance of a man who'd weathered worse than weather. They made their way back toward the fairground's edge, where the Iron Hawk's bikes stood like steadfast sentinels, rain sheeting off their tanks in rivulets that traced the welds and scars of countless miles. Jax and Lena had joined the group now, Lena's tattooed arms crossed over her chest as she scanned the thinning crowd, her eyes sharp for any ripple of trouble. The locals gave them a wider berth in the downpour, whispers trailing like the mist. Those riders. Hope they clear out before the roads flood. Judgment hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, painting the Hawks as interlopers rather than the quiet guardians they'd proven to be. Jack felt it settle on his shoulders, heavier than Lily's weight, a reminder of the margins they all navigated. The single mothers scraping by, the mechanics nursing engines on credit, the outcasts bound by a code that society dismissed as noise. Lily shivered against him, her breath warm puffs against his neck. "Daddy, I'm cold. Can we go inside somewhere?" Her voice was small, edged with the fatigue of the long day, and Jack's chest tightened with that familiar guilt, the one that whispered he should have packed her warmer, planned better, given her the rooted holidays other kids took for granted. He nodded, scanning the lots for shelter, a community tent sagging under the assault, or the glow of the auto shop's open bay doors a block away, where Al, the owner, might let them wait out the worst. But before he could move, a figure detached from the shadows near Grant's SUV, the billionaire striding toward them with purposeful steps that cut through the rain like a blade. Grant's overcoat was soaked through at the shoulders, water beading on the fine wool. But he didn't flinch, his face set in that frozen mask that had haunted the hall earlier. Up close, without the buffer of his entourage, he looked almost ordinary, tall, mid-50s, with silver threading his temples and eyes shadowed by sleepless calculations. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Jack caught the faint scent of his cologne, undercut now by the storm's rawness. The Hawks tensed subtly, Tommy's hand drifting to his belt, Jack's shifting his stance. But no one spoke, the rain drumming a tense rhythm on the ground between them. "Harlan," Grant said, his voice low, carrying over the patter without raising. The name hit Jack like a skid on black ice. He hadn't heard it spoken like that in years, not since the divorce papers, not since the life he'd left behind in a haze of courtroom silences and engine roars. How did this stranger know? Jack's arms tightened around Lily instinctively, her face burrowing deeper into his jacket. "What do you want?" he replied, the words clipped. Controlled rage simmering beneath the surface like hot oil in a pan. Compassion warred with caution. This man wasn't a threat in the physical sense, but the kind who reshaped worlds with a signature, leaving families like Jack's in the dust. Grant's gaze flicked to Lily, softening for a fraction before hardening again, the internal conflict playing out in the subtle twitch of his jaw. "I saw what you did back there, with the boy, the toys." He paused, rain tracing lines down his face, unheeded. "Reminded me of something, someone." The admission hung there, vulnerable in its brevity, and Jack felt the moral suspense tighten. A choice looming. Walk away, protect the fragile peace of the night, or engage. Risk unraveling whatever threads connected this polished intruder to their ragged world. Lily peeked out, her eyes curious on Grant's face, and the billionaire's breath hitched, a long pause where his chest rose and fell unevenly, strained like a man surfacing from deep water. Tommy stepped forward, his presence a quiet wall. "Ain't the time for chats, mister. Roads are flooding." But Grant didn't retreat. Instead, he pulled a slim wallet from his coat, extracting a card, crisp, embossed with his name, and a string of credentials that screamed power. "The mill site's closing tomorrow. Evictions start next week. Families like that one, the mother and her kid, they'll be first." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, the freeze thawing into something raw, and Jack saw it then, the hidden fracture. Grant wasn't just observing, he was confessing, the Santa question's echo driving him here to this rain-lashed confrontation. "I built my life on moves like that. But tonight, I need to know, what would you give for time, for her?" The question pierced, reframing the evening's small kindness into a mirror held up to Grant's own regrets. Jack's hands trembled faintly. Lily's warmth, the only anchor as memories surfaced, his own father's absence, the veteran scars Tommy carried that mirrored his unspoken ones from a brief stint in the Guard, deployments that left him hollow long before Lily's mother fled. Was that the connection, or deeper, a whisper of shared history Jack couldn't yet place? The rain intensified, blurring the edges of the world, and Jack met Grant's eyes, the compassion in his code urging him to see the man, not the myth. "Everything," he said finally, voice steady despite the storm inside, "but not at the cost of others' homes." Grant nodded, the card slipping from his fingers into Jack's palm, sodden but insistent. "Meet me at the diner tomorrow, dawn, before the crew rolls out." He turned then, retreating to his SUV, the door closing with a solid thunk that echoed the thunder. The Hawks exchanged glances, Lena's brow furrowed in quiet assessment, but no questions came. Loyalty meant trusting the road's turns. Jack pocketed the card, the paper heavy with unspoken truths, and carried Lily toward the shop's shelter, her head heavy on his shoulder. Inside Al's garage, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rubber, fluorescent lights buzzing over half-dismantled engines that waited like patients for morning. Al, a burly man with grease-blackened forearms, waved them to a corner heater without a word, tossing over a couple of threadbare blankets. The single mother from the parade arrived minutes later, her son trailing, both dripping and grateful as Tommy pressed a thermos of coffee into her hands. No explanations, just the subtle weave of community. Outcasts mending each other in the margins. Judgments from the outside world fading under the hum of shared survival. Jack settled Lily on a stool, wrapping her in the blanket, her eyelids drooping as the storm raged outside. The tension coiled deeper now, external pressures of evictions clashing with internal pulls of fatherhood and brotherhood. Grant's question lingered, a harbinger of revelations yet to come, forcing Jack to confront if the road's freedom was worth the cost of roots torn up. The rain hammered the tin roof, a relentless cadence, and in the quiet warmth of the garage, Jack felt the first cracks in his resolve, the moral choice sharpening like a blade on whetstone, compassion demanding he stay, fight not with fists, but with the silent justice that defined them all. Dawn would bring answers or more shadows, but for now he held his daughter close, the weight of unspoken loyalties a fragile shield against the night. The first grey light of dawn filtered through the grimy windows of Al's garage, turning the scattered tools and oil stains into muted silhouettes that spoke of interrupted labours. Jack hadn't slept, his back against a stack of tyres. Lily curled in his lap under the shared blanket, her breathing even and soft, like the hush after a storm's fury. The rain had tapered to a drizzle, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete and cooling metal, the kind that seeped into bones and lingered like regret. Tommy sat nearby on an overturned crate, nursing a thermos of reheated coffee. His prosthetic leg extended straight, the click absent in the stillness. The other Hawks had drifted off to their bikes or the diner's back room, leaving the space to this fragile vigil, brothers bound by silences that needed no filling. Jack shifted carefully, Lily stirring but not waking, her small hand fisted in his shirt. The card from Grant burned in his pocket, its edges softened by the night's damp, a tangible pull toward the unknown. Everything he'd said last night, the word echoing now in the quiet, a confession that exposed the fault lines of his life, the deployments that had hardened him young, the marriage frayed by absences, the single fatherhood that demanded he ride on even when every mile chipped at his resolve. The moral tension coiled tighter with each passing minute. Meet this stranger at dawn, risk whatever truths he carried, or throttle up and vanish into the road's anonymity, protecting Lily from entanglements that could shatter their fragile world. A low rumble outside broke the hush, the purr of an engine smoother than the Hawks' Harleys, cutting through the mist like a scalpel. Jack eased Lily onto the blanket, tucking it around her shoulders, and rose, joints protesting the cold floor. Tommy met his eyes, a nod passing between them. "Go, but we're here." The Brotherhood's compassion was in that glance, unspoken loyalty, a shield against the judgments waiting beyond these walls. Jack stepped out into the lot, boots splashing in shallow pools that reflected the paling sky, the air sharp with ozone and the faint, bitter edge of exhaust. Grant's SUV idled at the curb, headlights dimmed, the billionaire already standing beside it, a collar turned up against the chill. Up close in the half-light, the lines on his face seemed deeper, etched not just by age, but by the weight of choices that had built empires and buried families. He held 2 styrofoam cups, steam rising in lazy spirals, and extended one to Jack without preamble. Coffee, black like the road. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath. Strained breathing visible in the rise of his chest, as if the night had wrestled him into submission. Jack took the cup, the warmth seeping through his fingers, grounding him. No thanks, just a sip that burned going down, tasting of necessity. They walked toward the diner, a block away, the neon sign just flickering awake in the gloom, open in its eternal red promise. The street was empty, save for a stray cat darting across the asphalt, its paws silent on the wet surface. "Why me?" Jack asked finally, the words low, controlled, no rage but a quiet demand for truth. Grant paused under a flickering street lamp, the light pooling in his eyes like unshed rain. "That question last night, Santa's, it hit you same as me, froze me solid seeing you there with her. Reminded me of my boy. Lost him 5 years back, overdose. I was too busy closing deals to notice the signs." The admission hung between them, raw and unpolished, reframing the billionaire not as a distant force, but a man hollowed by his own margins, of wealth that isolated, ambition that blinded. Jack's step faltered, the coffee cup creaking in his grip, a moral conflict surging. You pity for this stranger, warring with the resentment of one who'd bulldozed lives like his own. Doesn't excuse pushing folks out. That mill site's home to people scraping by, mechanics, waitresses, single moms like the one at the parade. Grant nodded, his breath coming in measured pauses, hands trembling slightly as he lit a cigarette, the flame flaring brief and orange. "I know. That's why I'm here. The evictions. They're my signature. But seeing you pick up those toys, stand for that kid, it cracked something. What would I give for time with him? Everything, if I could rewind." They reached the diner, the bell jingling softly as Rosa let them in, her eyes sharp but kind, wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled of bleach and bleach. She poured fresh refills without asking, sliding plates of toast across, on the house, her glance at Jack saying she remembered the morning before. The 3 sat in a booth, the vinyl creaking under their weight, the jukebox silent for once, leaving only the patter of residual rain on the roof. Grant leaned forward, voice dropping. "There's more. Your name, Harlan. I knew a Harlan back in Reno. Army buddy of my brother's before the war took him. Said you saved his life in a convoy ambush, pulled him from a wreck under fire. Never got to thank you proper. That's why the developments. I've been avoiding the old roots, the ghosts." The revelation landed like a slow skid, Jack's fork pausing mid-air, the toast blurring as memories surfaced. The dust-choked roads of Iraq. The explosion's roar, a soldier's blood on his hands. Grant's brother, the face he'd buried under years of throttle and survival. His breath strained, a long pause where the diner's hum faded, leaving only the weight of unspoken connections. Compassion flooded in, softening the edges of his rage. This man wasn't just a developer, but a brother to the lost. Grieving in boardrooms what Jack mourned on the blacktop. "Didn't do it for thanks," Jack murmured, voice thick, hands steadying on the table. "Just the code. Protect your own." Grant's eyes glistened, the freeze fully thawed into vulnerability. A hand reaching across the table, not for a shake but a brief clasp, rough and real. Then let me honor it. The evictions, I'll halt them. Fund the mill. Keep the garages open. For the families. For her. He nodded toward the window, where Lily's silhouette appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes as Tommy guided her over. The moral suspense peaked then, Jack's choice crystallizing. Accept the bridge, weave this outcast into their world, or ride away, loyal to the road's isolation. Lily climbed into the booth, her small hand finding his under the table, and in that touch, the decision settled. Redemption through unlikely community, compassion bridging the divides. Rosa watched from the counter, a subtle smile breaking her weariness. The diner a quiet witness to the turning. Outside, the sun breached the clouds, gilding the wet asphalt, engines in the distance cooling as the town stirred. The threads of past and present knotted tighter, hidden truths emerging to reframe the journey, loyalty demanding they face the dawn together. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jack Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. The sun climbed higher over Dustville, its rays slicing through the lingering mist like tentative fingers, warming the puddles on the diner's lot into shallow mirrors that caught fragments of the waking world. Jack watched from the booth as Lily accepted a mug of hot chocolate from Rosa, her small fingers wrapping around the ceramic with a sigh of contentment, the steam curling up to soften the edges of her tired smile. The revelation from Grant still hung in the air, thick as the scent of fresh toast and cooling rain, reframing the man across the table from adversary to echo. A grieving brother, a father haunted by absences that mirrored Jack's own. The card in his pocket felt lighter now, not a summons but a tether, pulling disparate lives into alignment. Grant leaned back, his overcoat draped over the booth's edge, dripping forgotten onto the vinyl floor. His hands, usually commanding pens and ledgers, rested open on the table, palms upturned in a gesture of surrender Jack hadn't expected from someone who'd reshaped skylines. "It's not just the mill," Grant said quietly, his voice carrying the strain of a night without rest, breath measured as if weighing each word. "I've got resources, funds for the toy drive, scholarships for kids like yours, and that boy from the parade, no strings, consider it. Repayment." The word cracked slightly, vulnerability seeping through the polished facade, and Jack saw the moral conflict etched there, a billionaire seeking forgiveness not from courts or contracts, but from the quiet justice of outcasts who'd never asked for his empire. Tommy entered then, his boots leaving faint mud prints, prosthetic clicking softly as he settled beside Lily, pulling her onto his knee with the ease of an uncle. The Hawk's elder nodded at Grant, no warmth but no hostility, a measured acceptance born of roads shared with strangers who'd proven their mettle. "Actions over words, mister. We've seen too many promises wash out with the rain." His eyes, sharp behind the glasses, held Grant's without flinching, the Brotherhood's code woven into the silence, loyalty tested in deeds, compassion extended to those who defended the vulnerable, even if their armor was wool instead of leather. Jack's gaze drifted to the window, where the first locals trickled by, Al from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag as he headed to open shop. The single mother pushing a stroller with her son bundled inside, his plush bear from the night before peeking out like a talisman. The town stirred under the sun's reluctant gaze, neon signs from the night before, now pale ghosts against the daylight, engines humming to life in distant driveways. Jack felt the weight of survival in those sounds, the daily grind of margins, where single parents like him and her pieced together stability from shifts and scraps. The evictions loomed no more. Grant's offer a second chance not just for them, but for the hidden pasts that bound them all. Jack's military scars, Grant's lost son, the Hawk's unspoken griefs from wars and wanderings. Lily turned to Grant, her eyes wide and unfiltered, the innocence that cut through pretenses. "Are you Santa's friend? You make things better." Her words landed soft, a child's logic piercing deeper than any negotiation, and Grant's throat worked visibly, a long pause where his breath hitched, hands trembling faintly before he steadied them. "Something like that, kiddo. Let's say I'm learning to listen." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small, wrapped package, not lavish but simple, a doll with sun-bleached hair much like Lily's, its dress stitched with care. "Heard from Rosa about what you wanted. Merry Christmas, early." No fanfare, just the gesture hanging there. Compassion inside strength, a billionaire humbled by a question that demanded he give time, not treasures. Jack took the doll, his calloused fingers brushing Grant's, the contact brief but electric, a bridge of forgiveness between worlds. The internal rage that had simmered since the SUVs rolled into the diner lot cooled now, replaced by a quiet understanding. Redemption came not in grand gestures, but in these intimate pauses, where outcasts recognized their shared fractures. "We'll hold you to the mill," Jack said, voice low, the tremor in his hands fading as Lily hugged the doll to her chest, her joy a balm against the road's endless pull. "For the families, that's the code." The morning unfolded slowly in the diner, Rosa refilling cups without charge, her weary smile a testament to the subtle shifts, words spreading through the kitchen door to the mechanics outside, whispers of halted evictions, rippling like the sun on drying asphalt. Tommy clapped Grant on the shoulder as they rose, the gesture paternal, sealing the unlikely alliance. The Hawks gathered in the lot, engines idling but not urgent, the Brotherhood's loyalty extending now to this new thread in their tapestry, defending the vulnerable beyond their own ranks. Silent justice prevailing over law's cold indifference. As they prepared to ride, Jack lifted Lily into the sidecar, her laughter mingling with the first birdsong piercing the mist. Grant stood at the diner's edge, watching, his SUV forgotten for the moment, the freeze of the night before melted into resolve. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Engines cooling one last time in the growing light. Jack gunned the throttle gently, the vibration rumbling through him like a heartbeat renewed. The road ahead no longer a solitary escape, but a path laced with second chances. In the end, the open highway whispered that true gifts weren't wrapped in paper, but forged in the quiet choices that bound broken souls together. Engines humming hymns to unspoken forgiveness. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Single Dad Couldn't Afford a Gift. The billionaire froze. When Santa asked one question, "See you in the next one."